Kendra Dionne, and welcome to the Kendra Dionne Passion Project, where passion and purpose collide. So, today I want to talk to you guys about the topic of honor, because I do believe that there are things that God wants to do in this generation, and what happens sometimes is that we operate in dishonor, right? And when you operate in dishonor, that can become a snare to the things that God wants to do in your life, right? And so I just thought, we need to talk about this topic. So what got me started on this topic was I saw a video by a young lady, right? And she was just talking about all the highlights and strides that we as millennials are making as far as attending to our mental health, right? Breaking generational curses, and also like exposing like predators who were allowed to slide by the older generations, right? But then she started talking about like exploring spirituality and not just following white Jesus. And then she also talked about exploring sexuality and giving people the dignity to do the same, right? And that's where I was like that's where she kind of lost me, right? When she started talking about white Jesus, because who follows white Jesus? Because I don't, right? And there's just too much historical evidence at this point to debunk the myth that Christians serve a white Jesus, right? Like I've said this before, but I definitely feel like it's worth saying again, right? That even if Jesus was white, like y'all really focused on the wrong color at this point, right? Because the color that matters the most is the color of their blood. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time I checked, that's where the redemptive power lies, right? The power that changed our lives is in the power of their blood, not the color of his skin, right? So Jesus honestly could have been the color of a Smurf for all I care. As long as their blood still work, listen, okay? I'm not tripping off the color of his skin, right? And then we have that sexuality piece, right? And if we're going to bring it up and we're going to be exposing stuff that happened, we also have to be willing to admit and that the people who struggle with their sexuality and sexual identity were victims of those predators that we're exposing, right? And so if we're going to acknowledge the root, we also have to acknowledge the fruit. And what I mean by this is we understand the concept of cause and effect, or you reap what you sow, or what has been sown, right? So then we have to also consider the implications of what their actions did to those children, right? If they were sowing perversion, guess what we're going to get out of that, right? Most people call predators perverts, right? Because we understand that they indeed are operating out of perversion, right? So if they sow perversion into a young child, what is the fruit of that? What is the fruit of the perversion, right? And no, it's not always going to be the LGBTQ lifestyle. It could be promiscuity, gluttony, self-loathing, right? Like it can manifest as other things, right? Because perversion doesn't just impact sexuality, right? The definition of perversion is the alteration of something from its original course, meaning, or state to a distortion or corruption of what was first intended. Right? So like a perfect example that I thought of was the people that we watch on my 600 Pound Life, right? Many of those stories start off like I was sexually abused, right? And then I sought comfort in food and wanted to make myself unattractive, right? And so they have developed a distorted view of themselves, right? Which led to an unhealthy relationship with food, right? They perverted what food was intended for, which is to feed the body and energize us, right? So when someone is mishandled sexually, right, they become perverted, unfortunately, right? And it's going to manifest in different ways, right? But the bottom line is that they have been altered from their original state, right? Because God had an intent in mind when he created us, right? And designed us both male and female. He was not confused, right? So sexuality was never a thing that was needed or meant to be explored, right? However, because of corruption of molestation, rape, or just being in a sinful nature, period, right? Now we are distorted and corrupted, leaving us to question, who am I? What do I like? If it was a person of the same sex, why did I enjoy that experience? Am I gay now? Right? If it was a person of the opposite sex, right? And was a super disturbing experience, which any violation of a person's body is, now they no longer even desire to be touched or looked at by the opposite sex, right? Because that could have been the worst experience ever, and they don't even want to experience anything close to that again, right? And sometimes, right, their minds are so impacted by the experience, right, that they can't even fathom being attracted to the opposite, someone of the opposite sex again, right? Because it's like they're still haunted like by the scent and feeling like of disgust and betrayal, right? Because that is an act of betrayal against the body. And so, like, let me just really take a moment and stop and say, like, if you have experienced sexual abuse in any way, like, I am so sorry that happened to you, and I want to let you know that was not the will of God or his desire, right? But if you do decide to trust him with that part of you, he can heal you, right? Because what tends to happen with sexual abuse survivors, right? They mentally bury what happened to them. However, everything else in you knows it happened, right? Even if you're not acknowledging it cognitively anymore, right? But that's all I'm going to share on that topic, right? We can return at a later date because I really do want to like dig into this topic and dedicate a whole episode to it because I know how prevalent it is in the lives of so many people. And so many also have fallen prey to this scheme of the enemy, right? Because that's what it is. But let's get into today's real topic, which is honor, because all that young lady was saying and like her corresponding caption, it was given older generation sit down, right? Like, take a seat, y'all failed, and you know, it was very dishonoring, and it made me think about a question that I was presented with when I went to an event at the Word Network for young preachers, right? And so they were asking who got now, who got next, right? That was like the kind of overall topic. And the question was it possible to honor those who have gone before us, knowing that you have next or you're up next, right? And my first absolute answer was yes, right? Like, we just have to get rid of these dismissive attitudes that some people apparently have, right? But for the most part, like, we know they were doing the best they could with what they knew, right? And we're just growing on the backs of what they taught us, right? And so we have to learn to honor, right? And so when asked, was it possible to honor and serve when you know you got next? I immediately thought about David because that's what he did so well, right? David was anointed the king of Israel and he was cool with the current king, right? And even when the current king switched up on him, right? David still chose honor. Like Saul, the current king, he was legit trying to kill David, right? And when given the opportunity, David cut the hem of his robe, right? And then he immediately became bothered in his conscience, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, right? The Lord's anointed to put my hand out against him. Because he's the one who was anointed of the Lord, right? Like, that was his response, right? And that's 1 Samuel 24:6. And I believe that what he was displaying there was the understanding that God removes kings and raises them up. So he didn't need to get involved in replacing the current king, right? And so, we too need to grasp this concept, right? Although those who came before us might not have gotten it all right, they most certainly didn't get it all wrong either, right? Like, despite our feelings and maybe, toward their shortcomings, God still chose them for whatever reason, right? They had something in them that we needed, right? And so even if you feel like whoever raised you failed you completely, God in his sovereignty still chose them. And guess what? It birthed the resilient person that you are bragging on now. Like, you're so pompous and proud of yourself, and you don't realize that the challenges, setbacks, and disappointments produce the you that you are actually proud of now today, right? And I was just talking to my mom about how David learned how to be a king and a father from Saul's flaws, right? Like, it wasn't that Saul was doing it all right, but he watched him and he learned from him. David didn't have a great relationship with his biological father, like if you're familiar with the story. And so he comes into Saul's kingdom and he takes to him. And, Saul actually became his father-in-law, right? And then later in 1 Samuel 24, I was just talking to my mom about how David learned how to be king and father from Saul's flaws. Like, he watched and observed him as a father figure, right? And you see, David, he didn't have a great relationship with his own biological father, right? And when he came into Saul's kingdom, right, he kind of took to Saul in that way, right? And not to mention, he actually became his father-in-law, right? So in 1 Samuel 24:11, right, he looks at him and he says, my father, and shows the hem of the robe, right? And although according to human logic, he had every right to go after him, like, right? But he said, I honor God and you enough not to do that, right? And then later in David's life, right, his son Absalom begins to seek to take his life, and David refuses to retaliate. And I was saying to my mom, like, I think it was because he couldn't bring himself to do that, because he knew what it felt like to be on the other end of being hunted down by a father figure. So he was not about to go after his son. He like, I'm going to just let him be great. I'm going to lay low and let him do him, right? Another aspect that we also have to explore is that Saul never felt worthy in and of himself, right? And so in 1 Samuel 9, when Samuel greets Saul, right, he's like, why are you talking to me like this? Like, in his whole response, he said, am I not a Benjamite, right? The smallest of the tribe of Israel. And is my family not the smallest of the families of all the tribes of Benjamin? Like, why then have you spoken to me this way, right? Like, he didn't even think he deserved the verbal honor that he was given. And then when he is publicly chosen as king in 1 Samuel 10, after they cast the lots, he's chosen, and they can't even find the man. They like, where he at? And he over in a corner somewhere, because he never felt worthy. So what happens to a person who is chosen for a job and they don't even feel worthy to do it? They don't feel worthy to fulfill it. You don't know how those who were called to birth or raise you felt when they realized, like, they are now responsible for raising up a human being. Like, that's not no small task, right? And you don't know what trauma or insecurities or failures even preceded your conception. So maybe they did make some mistakes, right? But you don't know if they were operating in fear and scared to even mess up, right? Because sometimes fear manifests as anger or resistance, and sometimes rejection, right? But whatever it was, God needed you to witness it, right? Because he knew you witnessing whatever it is that you went through was going to shape you into who he needed you to be, right? And so how many things have you done differently because of what you witnessed and realized, like, yo, that wasn't the move. Like, they missed the mark there, right? And now most of us, despite what we experience at the end of the day or whatever negligence, right, ain't none of us been hunted down or with the intent of murder by the people who took care of us, right? So we need to learn to extend some grace to them, because if you're a parent now, right, you kind of already start to understand, like, it's hard making decisions on behalf of those children, right? It's hard to, like, really do everything right all the time. And I ended up finding the most grace for my mom after I became a mom, because I began to understand the weight and the pressure of what she was standing up under, right? And I'm not saying this to justify any of her actions or the wrong things that she did do, but at least I did, begin to develop a better context for understanding how she was able to come to do some of the things that she did. So we have to learn to honor up, because what they got wrong, absolutely. Break those generational curses. I am not speaking bondage. I'm not saying live in it, right? We need to heal it for the next generation. However, they taught us and poured into us some things that were good. And because the other part is, this is where a snare can come into place, because when you dishonor those who came before you, you subsequently dishonor God who positioned them in your life, right? And then what also ends up happening is kind of like you throw the baby away with the bath water when all they offered wasn't bad and are some of the things that probably play a crucial role in your life now, right? Like, they probably sowed some good seeds in there. For instance, right, back to her white Jesus comment, right? The resentment placed there, right? It was so loaded that it wasn't just about Jesus. It was like their beliefs is trash. People who believe it, like, they ain't real. You felt all of that with it. And it's sad, because what it showed me is that she just had some poor ambassadors of the kingdom who just didn't represent the heart of God, because some people don't represent his heart, right? And then they won't represent it concerning you, right? And I remember a time when I was working at a job and I was dealing with a lot of things financially and personally, right? And at the same time, I was beginning my relationship with God. I was about 24 or 25. And so to encourage myself and remind myself of the promises of God, I will write scriptures down and I will put them on my desktop, on my desk, like wherever, right? Wherever I needed them in my purview so I could see them all the time, to encourage myself. And one day this young lady came up to me, and she was white, and she said, "How do you believe in God the way that you do?" And all I could say was that God stopped being my mom and grandma's God, and he became my God, right? And so what I realized is when the gospel is lived out well, it will compel men and women to seek out what it is, right? And she wasn't on some, oh, you serve white Jesus, so I got dibs. Tell me how I get it on it, right? No, she saw a young woman who had a relationship with God, and the color of his skin did not matter. Like, she didn't ask, do you believe God, and do you know he was white? Like, his skin color never even came up, right? Because the redemptive power doesn't lie in the power of his skin. And so most people, what happens is they want a genie, right? They want a God they can rub on. He grants your request, and you just put him back in a bottle until you need him again, right? But that's not the God that we serve. The God that we serve, he loves us and he requires relationship, right? So I like to use this analogy all the time because I feel like you would get it. If you have a crush, right, and it's somebody that you really like, you want to spend time with them, you chilling with them, and then you start to notice that they treating you like a stinky link, right? And they only hitting you up when they want some or want something, right? Eventually, you want to start to be like, bruh, what's up with you? Like, because I'm really invested in this situation, and you're not about to keep playing in my face. Like, you only calling me when you want something, right? And it's not so much that you don't want to do the things that they are asking you, or serve them in a way or the capacity that a relationship requires, but at the same time, it's like you don't want to feel used, right? You're like, yo, you getting VIP treatment, but you're treating me kind of basic, and I'm not with it, right? And like I said, you would be delighted to do these things for them, like, but don't play with me. Don't use me. Like, that's what we're not going to do, right? And if we as humans can feel this, how much more does God deserve not to be our sneaky link or our side piece, right? Like, you know, another real question, though, I think that we need to ask are we mad at God because of the parents that he gave us, or the disappointments that we faced, or the bad representation that we seen of him, right? Like, is that why we just want to treat him like everyone else? Like, all right, look, what can I get out of the situation? Like, what you gonna do for me? Like, if I could get something out of it, cool. If not, you're really worthless to me, right? And I really want us to examine our hearts concerning all that we talked about today, because honor, like I said, is so important. And when we honor those who raised us and played a part in our development, that would include teachers, your coaches, youth leaders, parents, grandparents, right? We're also honoring the decision of God about us, right? And so I believe that if we're going to honor well, we have to learn to forgive, because honor is hard without forgiveness. And so this week, I want you to reach out to a person who had a significant hand in raising you and say thank you, or send a card or edible arrangement, right? Something that says, like, I see the sacrifices that you made, and I understand that there are probably some that I don't know about, right? Because even as parents, we know there are so many things that we do with our children knowing. And we can say, even though I might not escape without some scrapes and some bruises, like, yo, you held me down for real. Like, and I just honor you for standing up under the banner or weight of whatever God called you to do to raise me, right? And I don't know what trauma that you never got a chance to heal from, but you still took on raising me, right? And it could be an aunt or a godmom or a cousin who took you in, right? Like, whoever it was, like, even if they didn't get it all right, like, please honor and accept the fact that they didn't get it all wrong, and they did the best with what they had, right? And God chose them for you, right? And even if it's a parent who was totally absent and wasn't there at all, be blessed that they knew they ain't had what it took, and they got out the way so that God could position people in your life to help you become who he wanted you to be. Okay? And like I said earlier, even about the sexual abuse stuff, if you have some rejection stuff from parental figures or some parental or authority figure bruises or heart wounds, give it to God so that he can heal it. Like, because God loves you and he wants to see you healed and whole so that you can walk out the purpose that he created you for, right? Because that's what this podcast is all about. Walking in purpose from a place of wholeness. So I love you guys, and I pray that it blessed you and encouraged you. Can't wait to talk to you guys next week.